My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old, and I recently learned that the most expensive lesson of my life cost exactly $620,000. When I asked my husband Gavin about the grand opening of the cosmetic clinic I had fully funded, he took a sip of his wine, looked me dead in the eye, and said it opened 6 weeks ago. We only invited close family and friends. A few days later, he called me screaming that the business bills were overdue and demanding to know if I sent the money. I just smiled and told him my money is only for close family and friends. He should probably go ask them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an arrogant partner exactly who holds the power. Now let me take you to the exact moment the blinders fell off. It was Thanksgiving night, and the atmosphere inside one of downtown Chicago's most exclusive restaurants was suffocatingly pretentious. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over our private dining table. The scent of roasted pheasant and truffle oil hung in the air, a stark departure from the warm, chaotic, and loving holiday dinners I grew up with in my working-class neighborhood. But I was trying to be a supportive wife. I sat there in my tailored silk blouse, playing the role of the successful commercial real estate portfolio manager who had married into a family of self-proclaimed elites. Around the table sat my husband Gavin, a 35-year-old cosmetic dermatologist whose ego was currently inflating faster than his career. Next to him was his mother, Patricia, a woman who wore her condescension like a designer perfume. Across from me sat Gavin's sister Naomi and her husband Jamal. Jamal, an African-American bank branch manager, was usually the only person in this family I could tolerate, but tonight he was unusually quiet, keeping his eyes glued to his plate. I thought this dinner was the perfect time to celebrate. For the past year, I had poured my energy, my financial expertise, and exactly $620,000 from my pre-marital trust fund into making Gavin's dream a reality. I had secured the commercial lease. I had funded the state-of-the-art laser machines. I had built his aesthetic clinic from the ground up. So as the waiter cleared our salad plates, I placed my wine glass down and smiled at my husband. I asked him how the final permit inspections were going, and when we could finally schedule the grand opening of the clinic. I had even bought a new dress for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The table went dead silent. The clinking of silver forks against fine china stopped entirely. Gavin did not even flinch. He casually wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, reached for his Cabernet, and sighed as if my question was a massive inconvenience. "The clinic opened 6 weeks ago, Natalie," he said, his voice dripping with casual cruelty. "We already had the launch party. We only invited close family and friends. I figured you were too busy with your spreadsheets and real estate contracts to care about a cosmetic launch. Besides, it was an exclusive guest list." I sat frozen. The air was knocked completely out of my lungs. 6 weeks ago. My husband had launched the business I bought for him, celebrated it, and deliberately hid it from me for over a month. Before I could even process the magnitude of his betrayal, my mother-in-law, Patricia, leaned forward. Her diamond necklace caught the light as a wicked, satisfied smirk spread across her face. "Let us be honest, Natalie," Patricia chimed in, her tone sweet but laced with venom. "A high-end medical spa in the Gold Coast needs to maintain a certain pedigree, a luxury aesthetic. Having someone with your blue-collar background standing at the door greeting our elite clients would just confuse the brand. You are a hard worker, sure, but you simply do not have the polish our family represents." Gavin needed people there who understand luxury, not someone who grew up clipping grocery coupons. Naomi let out a sharp, mocking laugh, covering her mouth, as if trying to hide her amusement. I glanced at Jamal, hoping for a shred of support, but he just swallowed hard and refused to look up from his untouched food. He knew. They all knew. The entire family had attended the grand opening of my clinic, drank champagne on my dime, and laughed behind my back while I sat in my office paying their vendor invoices. Most women would have burst into tears. Most women would have screamed, thrown a glass of wine in Gavin's face, or caused a massive scene right there in the restaurant. And for a fraction of a second, the sting of humiliation burned the back of my throat. But I am not most women. I deal with multi-million-dollar commercial properties and cutthroat investors every single day. I do not cry over bad investments. I liquidate them. I looked at the smug, arrogant faces of the family who thought they had successfully used me as their personal bank. The corners of my mouth slowly curled into a cold, terrifying smile. I did not say a single word. Instead, I calmly reached into my designer purse and pulled out my phone. The game had just changed. Under the table, my thumbs moved with practiced precision. The screen of my phone illuminated my lap, completely hidden by the heavy linen tablecloth. While my husband and his family basked in their shared cruelty, I was already logging into my secure private wealth portal. Naomi took another delicate sip of her champagne and looked me up and down. Her gaze lingered on my blouse. "You know, Natalie," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Maybe now that Gavin is running a premier medical facility, he can hire you a personal stylist. That top is just so tragically corporate. It screams middle management. You really need to soften your look if you want to stand next to a top-tier surgeon." I did not blink. I did not defend my wardrobe. I simply kept my eyes locked on hers while my right thumb tapped the screen below. Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was the bank branch manager who had initially set up the business accounts for Gavin using my capital, of course. Jamal knew exactly how much money was flowing from my trust fund into that clinic. He knew the margins, he knew the overhead costs. He knew that the custom Italian leather waiting chairs and the imported marble reception desk were paid for by the woman his wife was currently mocking. And looking at the sheer panic flashing in his dark eyes, I realized he also knew I had the power to turn off the faucet. He swallowed hard, adjusting his collar, but he kept his mouth shut. Cowardice is a funny thing. It makes accomplices out of otherwise decent people. My banking dashboard loaded. There it was. The joint operating account for Gavin's medical spa. I tapped into the recurring transfers tab. For the past 6 months, I had authorized a direct deposit of $25,000 to hit his business account on the first of every month. It was an operating cushion designed to cover his inflated payroll, the lease on his unnecessary luxury company vehicle, and the premium marketing agency he just had to hire. The commercial lease on the downtown property alone was staggering. Without my monthly injection, his pristine elite clinic was mathematically insolvent within days. I clicked on the active transfer mandate. The screen prompted me with a warning asking if I was sure I wanted to permanently cancel this recurring payment. I did not hesitate. I tapped confirm. The green toggle slid to the left and turned gray. Status canceled. Just like that, the safety net was gone. His luxury brand was now in free fall, and he did not even know he had been pushed out of the plane. Gavin chuckled at Naomi's insult, oblivious to the fact that I had just financially decapitated his business. "You have to forgive her, Naomi," Gavin said, swirling his wine with a pretentious flick of his wrist. "Natalie is all numbers and contracts. She does not understand aesthetics or branding. That is why keeping our worlds separate just makes sense. I need to protect the image of the clinic." I locked my phone and slipped it back into my purse. Then I reached for my wallet and pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently next to my water glass, making sure the face of Benjamin Franklin was staring right at my mother-in-law. "What is that for, Gavin?" asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "That is for my steak," I replied, my voice completely flat. My tone was so devoid of emotion that the entire table stopped laughing. The silence was thick, heavy, and sudden. Patricia scoffed, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. Stop being so dramatic, Natalie. Gavin is going to pay the bill. He is celebrating his launch. Do not try to ruin his night just because you feel left out." I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my tragically corporate blouse. I looked down at Patricia, then shifted my gaze to Gavin. The smug satisfaction was slowly draining from his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "I am not being dramatic, Patricia. I am being precise, I said, making sure my voice carried just enough for the neighboring tables to hear. I only pay for my own meals now. Gavin scoffed, leaning back in his chair, trying to maintain his arrogant facade. Sit down, Natalie. People are staring at you. Let them stare, Gavin, I replied, picking up my coat from the back of the chair. I hope the food tonight was excellent, and I sincerely hope your elite guests enjoyed the grand opening party I paid for, because as of 2 minutes ago, my financial contributions to your aesthetic empire have been permanently terminated. Gavin froze. His hand paused midway to his glass. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, panicked whisper. I slung my purse over my shoulder and looked him dead in the eye, delivering the final blow. I canceled the monthly $25,000 operating transfer. The well is dry. Your luxury brand better be able to cover its own payroll on Monday. Good luck with your image. I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in stunned, terrified silence. The weekend passed in absolute silence. I did not return to the penthouse we shared. Instead, I stayed at a boutique hotel downtown, enjoying room service and uninterrupted sleep, while my phone screen lit up with missed calls from Gavin and his mother. I let every single one go to voicemail. By Monday morning, I was back in my element. My corner office on the 42nd floor offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a constant reminder of the commercial real estate empire I helped manage. I sat at my mahogany desk reviewing a multi-million-dollar acquisition portfolio, completely unbothered by the domestic grenade I had detonated on Thanksgiving. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, my private cell phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Gavin's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up and pressed the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. Natalie, what the hell is going on? Gavin screamed into the receiver. His voice was shrill, completely stripped of the pretentious, smooth tone he usually used. The medical supply vendor just declined our order for the new Botox shipment. They said the account has insufficient funds. I just checked the business portal and the operating account is entirely drained. The bills are overdue. Did you send the money? I leaned back in my leather chair and turned to face the floor-to-ceiling window. I watched the tiny cars moving along the streets below. I told you on Thursday, Gavin. I canceled the transfer, I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional, as if I were speaking to a delinquent tenant. Stop playing games, Natalie. This is not funny. He barked, the panic evident in his heavy breathing. Payroll hits on Wednesday. I have 3 nurses, a receptionist, and a clinic manager who need to be paid. The lease payment for the building is due on the 1st. I cannot run a luxury medical spa on zero capital. You need to log in right now and wire the $25,000. Actually wire $50,000 so we have a buffer. You are embarrassing me in front of my staff. I am not embarrassing you, Gavin. You are embarrassing yourself, I said smoothly. You launched a business using my capital, celebrated it with your mother who thinks I am a peasant, and deliberately excluded me from the opening because I do not fit your brand. So I adjusted my financial strategy accordingly. My money is only for close family and friends. Ask them. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. For a second, Gavin was speechless. He was so used to manipulating me, to making me feel like I was lucky to be married to a handsome surgeon, that he genuinely believed I would cave under his pressure. You psychotic witch, he finally hissed. You think you can just shut off the faucet and ruin my practice? I am a doctor. I am the face of this brand. You are nothing but a glorified landlord. I smiled at the reflection of myself in the glass window. A glorified landlord who holds the deed to your entire life, I thought to myself. If you do not wire that money by noon, I am taking matters into my own hands. Gavin threatened, his voice dropping an octave into a cold, menacing growl. You seem to forget who holds the power in this marriage. I bought the penthouse before we even met. It is my property. If you want to play hardball, I will just go to the bank this afternoon and pull $50,000 from the joint home equity line of credit. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused by his profound ignorance of financial law. I will leverage the equity in my condo to keep my clinic running. Gavin continued, emboldened by his own terrible idea. And since you want to act like a petulant child, you can find somewhere else to live. I am having the locks changed today. When you get off work, do not bother coming back to my house. You will be homeless by dinner time if you keep playing these games with my career." He slammed the phone down, ending the call with a sharp click. I pulled the device away from my ear and set it gently on my desk. I did not panic. I did not rush to call my lawyer. I did not cry over the threat of losing my home. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed through my spacious office. Gavin was a brilliant doctor when it came to injecting fillers into the faces of wealthy socialites, but he was an absolute fool when it came to real estate. He thought he owned that penthouse just because his name was on the original mortgage. He had completely forgotten the catastrophic financial mistake he made 3 years ago. The mistake that I had quietly cleaned up to save him from bankruptcy. He was about to learn a very harsh lesson about what happens when you try to evict the person who actually owns the paper on your life. At exactly 5 o'clock that evening, I closed my laptop, packed my leather briefcase, and took the private elevator down to the parking garage. The drive back to our Gold Coast penthouse was surprisingly peaceful. I listened to a financial podcast completely unfazed by the storm Gavin thought he had orchestrated. When I stepped off the elevator and onto the private landing of our floor, the hallway was dead silent. I walked up to the heavy oak double doors, pulled my brass key from my purse, and slid it into the lock. It did not turn. I pulled the key out and inspected the metal casing. There were fresh scratches around the deadbolt. Gavin had actually done it. He had hired an emergency locksmith to lock his own wife out of her home. Through the frosted glass side panel of the door, a shadow moved. I stepped closer. There, standing in the marble foyer with a glass of my expensive imported Pinot Noir in her hand, was my mother-in-law, Patricia. She pressed her face near the glass, her designer jewelry glinting under the hallway chandelier. She raised her hand, gave me a sarcastic little wave, and clearly mouthed the words, "Get out." She looked so triumphant, so entirely convinced that she had won. She thought I was going to pound on the door, scream, and cry out of desperation. She wanted a show. I did not give her one. I took exactly 2 steps back, leaned against the hallway wall, and pulled out my phone. I bypassed Gavin completely and dialed the local police precinct. I informed the dispatcher that an unauthorized individual had changed the locks and barricaded herself inside my primary residence. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open and 2 uniformed Chicago police officers stepped onto the landing. "Good evening, ma'am," the taller officer said. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am," I replied calmly. "My mother-in-law is currently inside. My husband changed the locks today while I was at work, and she is refusing to grant me access." The officer knocked heavily on the door. "Police, open up!" There was a frantic shuffling sound, and a moment later the door swung open. Patricia stood there, clutching her chest, immediately pivoting into the role of a terrified, frail older woman. "Oh, officers, thank goodness you are here," she gasped, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This woman is my son's estranged wife. She is having a mental breakdown. My son owns this penthouse. He bought it years before they were even married. He legally changed the locks today to protect his property, and now she is harassing me." The taller officer looked at me, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "Ma'am, if your husband bought the property prior to the marriage and your name is not on the original deed, this becomes a civil matter. We cannot force entry if he is the sole legal owner." Patricia smirked, taking a triumphant sip of her wine. "I told you, Natalie. You are nothing but a gold digger. Go find a hotel." I smiled, unlatched my leather briefcase, and pulled out a crisp, thick manila folder. "Officer," I said, handing the documents over. "My husband did purchase this property 5 years ago. However, 3 years ago, he defaulted on his mortgage due to reckless credit card debt. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. To save his medical license and his pristine credit score, an independent corporate entity stepped in, paid off the debt, and acquired the deed to the property." The officer flipped open the folder, scanning the notarized pages. The current legal owner of this penthouse is Apex Holdings, LLC. I continued keeping my eyes locked on Patricia's increasingly confused face. And if you look at the second page, you will see the articles of organization for that LLC. I am the sole managing member. I own the company. Therefore, I own this penthouse. My husband is not the homeowner, he is my tenant. And he just illegally locked his landlord out of her own building. Patricia stopped breathing. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost. The officer carefully examined the state seals and the signatures. He closed the folder, handed it back to me, and turned his imposing frame toward Patricia. His sympathetic demeanor vanished instantly. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "you are trespassing on private property. You need to step aside and let the homeowner inside." But my son, Patricia stammered, her voice trembling. "My son said he owned it." "Your son lied to you," I said, stepping past her and crossing the threshold into my beautiful marble foyer. "He has been paying rent to his own wife for 36 months without even realizing it." I turned around to face her, folding my arms across my chest. I looked at the grandfather clock ticking against the wall. "It is currently 6:15, I said, my voice ice cold. "You have exactly 15 minutes to pack whatever fits into your designer bags and vacate my property. If you are still standing in my house at 6:30, I will have the officers arrest you for criminal trespassing. Now, start packing." I woke up the next morning in a penthouse that was finally quiet. The air was still, and the lingering scent of Patricia's heavy designer perfume was already fading from the marble foyer. Gavin had not dared to show his face. He knew he had lost his fortress. But I was not about to sit back and wait for his next move. Locking them out was just the first defensive maneuver. I needed to go on the offensive. I needed to know exactly how deep his financial deception went, and there was only one person who had the blueprints to his entire operation. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting in a quiet, dimly lit booth at an artisan coffee shop directly across the street from the commercial bank branch in the financial district. I knew my brother-in-law's routine perfectly. Every morning before putting on his branch manager name tag and unlocking the bank doors, Jamal stopped here for a black iced coffee. Sure enough, he walked through the heavy glass doors right on schedule. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped inside his tailored suit. I waited until he grabbed his cup from the barista counter before I stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path to the exit. "Have a seat, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice low and authoritative. I gestured to the leather booth I had just vacated. Jamal froze. His dark eyes widened in panic, and he instinctively glanced toward the door, as if calculating his chances of escaping. But he was a smart man, and he knew better than to run from a woman who managed billion-dollar real estate portfolios. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and slowly slid into the booth opposite me. "Natalie, listen." Jamal started, holding his hands up defensively. "I heard about what happened at the restaurant, and Gavin called me last night screaming about the locks at the condo. I swear to you, I want no part of this family crossfire. Naomi and I are staying out of it." "You are not staying out of it, Jamal," I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the wooden table. "You are already in it up to your neck. You are the branch manager who processed Gavin's business accounts. You expedited the corporate paperwork for his clinic, and you linked my personal trust fund to his operating accounts to secure his credit lines. You did all of that without requiring me to be physically present to sign the secondary guarantor forms." Jamal wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. His hands were trembling so much he had to put his coffee down. "I processed the paperwork legally, Natalie. Gavin brought in the signed authorizations. You two are married. It is standard spousal procedure. Do not insult my intelligence." I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We both know Gavin forged my signature on the secondary compliance documents to rush the approval. You turned a blind eye because he is your brother-in-law, and you wanted to keep Naomi happy. That is a direct violation of federal banking regulations." I leaned back, giving him a moment to let the gravity of his situation sink in. "If I walk across the street right now and file a formal fraud complaint with your corporate compliance office?" I said, holding his terrified gaze. They will launch a forensic audit of every single loan you have approved for my husband. When they find the forged documents, Gavin will face wire fraud charges, and you, Jamal, will lose your banking license, your career, and quite possibly your freedom, all to protect a man who would throw you under the bus in a heartbeat. Jamal buried his face in his hands. He let out a long, ragged sigh. He was a man trapped between his wife's toxic family and his own survival. When he finally looked up at me, the facade was completely gone. "What do you want to know?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I want the truth about the grand opening I demanded. Gavin did not exclude me just because I do not fit his luxury brand. He is arrogant, but he is not reckless enough to alienate his primary investor over aesthetics." Why was I really kept away from that party? Jamal looked out the window, unable to meet my eyes. He took a shaky breath. "It was not about the brand, Natalie. It was about the optics." Gavin did not cut the ribbon alone. Who was with him? I asked, my heart beginning to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Sydney, Jamal confessed, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "She is the 24-year-old clinic manager he hired a few months ago." She stood right next to him, holding the giant scissors. Gavin introduced her to the investors and the family as his indispensable partner. I narrowed my eyes. My mother-in-law attended a party where my husband flaunted his employee like a partner, and nobody said a word. Why? Because of the announcement, Jamal said, finally forcing himself to look at me. The guilt in his eyes was overwhelming. Gavin and Sydney made a toast before the ribbon cutting. They announced that she is pregnant with his child. Patricia was crying tears of joy. "The whole family knows Natalie. They have known for months." I left Jamal sitting in that coffee shop staring into his cold, iced coffee. The walk back to my building was an absolute blur. The biting Chicago wind whipped against my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was furiously calculating the pieces of the puzzle that had just fallen into place. A 24-year-old mistress, a pregnancy, a public announcement that my own mother-in-law applauded while drinking champagne I paid for. They had not just stolen my money. They had used my capital to fund an entirely new life, laughing at my expense while I sat in my office paying their vendor invoices. I walked into my penthouse, bypassed the kitchen entirely, and went straight to my home office. I locked the heavy oak door behind me. I sat down at my desk, fired up my secure encrypted laptop, and logged directly into the commercial loan portal. Because Jamal was the branch manager who originally processed the accounts, the back-end access codes he had set up during the initial funding phase were still active. He was too paralyzed by fear to revoke them this morning. I knew my window of opportunity was incredibly narrow. I did not just look at the high-level summaries. I am a commercial real estate portfolio manager. I know exactly how to track every single penny through a labyrinth of corporate shell accounts and inflated vendor invoices. I pulled the master ledger for the $620,000 trust fund injection. Gavin had categorized it as initial startup capital, which was standard. But as I drilled down into the operating expenses over the last 4 months, his pristine facade began to crumble into a pathetic pile of financial fraud. There were invoices for premium catering that did not match any scheduled clinic events. There were massive charges for 5-star hotel suites across the city. And then I found the fatal bleed, a glaring unauthorized wire transfer for $140,000 sent directly to a luxury auto dealership in the suburbs. My eyes scanned the attached digital invoice. It was for a brand new, fully loaded Mercedes G-Wagon. I clicked on the title registration details attached to the wire proof. The vehicle was not registered to my husband. It was registered to Sydney. My husband had taken $140,000 of my hard-earned trust fund money, bought a luxury SUV for his pregnant 24-year-old mistress, and categorized it on the corporate tax returns as a company vehicle for the medical spa. The sheer audacity of it made my blood run cold. I dug deeper into the line items. There were charges for a high-end baby boutique, charges for a luxury maternity wardrobe, spa days, designer handbags. He was aggressively siphoning my capital to play house with another woman. I immediately opened a secure cloud folder and started exporting the ledgers. I needed every PDF, every wire transfer receipt, every forged signature Jamal had pushed through. The progress bar on my screen ticked forward. 10%, 30%, 50%. My heart pounded against my ribs. I could hear the digital hum of the server pulling the files. Suddenly the screen glitched. The progress bar froze abruptly at 72%. A red dialog box popped up in the center of my monitor. Session expired, access denied. I rapidly clicked the refresh button, but the portal immediately redirected me to the bank's public homepage. Gavin had realized what I was doing. The notification must have pinged his phone when I initiated the massive data export. He had triggered a manual override on the account permissions and locked me out of the system. I sat back in my leather chair, taking a deep, slow breath to steady my racing pulse. A moment later, my cell phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. The screen lit up with a text message from Gavin. I picked it up and read the notification. It was short, intensely arrogant, and dripping with the false confidence of a man who genuinely thought he had outsmarted a financial professional. The text read, "You can stop digging. I just revoked your access. That $620,000 was a spousal gift deposited into an account bearing my name. You have no legal claim to any of it. Have a nice life in your empty apartment." I stared at the glowing words on the screen. He actually believed that. He believed that because we were married, he could take my premarital assets, funnel them into his business, buy a car for his mistress, and simply wash his hands of me. He thought the label of a spousal gift made him completely untouchable. I slowly set the phone down and looked at the 72% of the financial records I had successfully downloaded before the lockout. It was more than enough. He wanted to play legal games. He was about to find out that I wrote the rulebook. I stared at the text message from Gavin for a few more seconds, letting his absolute delusion wash over me. He really thought a simple text message would protect him from corporate fraud. I spent the rest of the night organizing the 72% of the financial ledgers I had managed to rip from the portal before the lockout. I compiled every fraudulent invoice and every wire transfer into a secure digital vault for my legal team. I went to sleep feeling completely in control. But in the age of the internet, control is an illusion that can be shattered by a single upload. The next morning, I arrived at my corporate office early. I had just poured my first cup of coffee when my phone began to vibrate violently across my mahogany desk. It was not Gavin, it was Naomi, then Jamal, then 3 different colleagues from the commercial real estate firm. I frowned and unlocked my screen, tapping on a link my assistant had just texted me. The caption simply read, "You need to see this right now." The link opened a video on a popular social media platform. The view count was already climbing past 2 million. The thumbnail featured a young blonde woman sitting on a plush beige sofa, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. It was Sydney. I hit play. The 24-year-old clinic manager was wearing an oversized pastel cardigan that completely swallowed her frame intentionally, designed to make her look small and vulnerable. She rested one hand protectively over a prominent, perfectly round baby bump that looked suspiciously large for the timeline Jamal had described. She looked directly into the camera, her lower lip trembling as a single perfectly timed tear rolled down her cheek. "Hi, everyone," Sydney began, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I never wanted to take this public, but my family and our small business are under attack by a very wealthy, very vindictive woman. My partner is a dedicated doctor who just opened a medical clinic to help people feel beautiful. But his estranged wife is trying to bankrupt us out of pure spite." My jaw tightened. The camera cut to a wider angle, revealing Gavin sitting beside her. He looked down at the floor, playing the role of the defeated nobleman. He reached out and gently squeezed Sydney's hand. "She is a powerful corporate real estate executive." Sydney continued, crying harder now. When she found out about us, and found out that I was pregnant, she completely snapped. She is barren, you see. She could never give Gavin the family he always dreamed of. And instead of letting him move on and be happy, she is using her corporate wealth to illegally freeze our bank accounts. She is trying to starve us out. She wants to shut down the clinic and put our unborn child on the streets. I stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. The sheer manipulation was staggering. They had taken my $620,000 investment, the money Gavin had stolen to buy her a luxury Mercedes, and flipped the narrative entirely. They painted me as a jealous, barren corporate monster trying to ruin a helpless pregnant woman and a heroic doctor. The video ended with the plea to support their business and stand up against toxic corporate bullying. I scrolled down to the comment section. It was an absolute bloodbath. The internet mob had fully mobilized. Thousands of comments were pouring in by the minute. Users were calling me a psychopath, a bitter old woman, and a monster. But the nightmare did not stop at the comment section. The internet is ruthless, and it took them less than an hour to dox me completely. They found my professional networking profiles. They identified the commercial real estate firm where I worked as a portfolio manager. My office phone started ringing, then my assistant's phone. I opened a new tab on my browser and pulled up our company's public directory and review pages. My stomach plummeted. We were being relentlessly review-bombed. Hundreds of fake one-star reviews were flooding our corporate pages, tanking the firm's pristine reputation. The reviews were vicious. Do not do business with these people. They employ a barren psychopath who starves pregnant women. Fire Natalie immediately, or we will boycott your properties. The digital smear campaign was coordinated, aggressive, and highly effective. Gavin and Sydney thought they could use public outrage to terrify me into dropping my claims and walking away from my money. They thought the threat of losing my high-paying career would break me. My office door suddenly swung open. My assistant stood there, her face completely pale. She swallowed hard and pointed down the hall. "The senior partners want to see you in the boardroom," she whispered. "Right now." I stood up from my desk, smoothed the wrinkles from my pencil skirt, and grabbed my leather briefcase. I followed my assistant down the long glass-walled corridor. I could feel the eyes of every analyst and junior broker tracking my movements. The whispers had already started. By the time I reached the double mahogany doors of the executive boardroom, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. I pushed the doors open. At the head of the massive granite table sat Harrison, the senior managing partner of the firm. Flanking him were two other senior executives and the head of our public relations department. On the giant flat-screen monitor mounted to the wall, Sydney's tear-stained face was frozen in high definition. The video had been paused right on the moment she rubbed her fake baby bump. "Have a seat," Natalie Harrison said, his voice tight. He rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. "We have a massive crisis on our hands. The firm's public inbox is overflowing. Our commercial clients are calling asking why one of our top portfolio managers is allegedly bankrupting a pregnant woman. We are losing points on our corporate reputation index by the minute." Before I could even open my mouth to defend myself, Harrison pointed to the black conference phone sitting in the center of the table. The green speaker light was illuminated. "We have someone on the line," Harrison continued. "Your husband bypassed reception and managed to get a direct line to our PR department 10 minutes ago. He asked to speak with the partners." Gavin's voice suddenly echoed through the boardroom speakers, smooth, practiced, and dripping with fake empathy. "Natalie, honey, I know you are in the room," Gavin said, his tone perfectly modulating between sorrow and forgiveness. "I am so sorry it had to come to this. I never wanted Sydney to post that video, but she was just so terrified for our baby. You backed us into a corner, but I want to fix this. I want to save your career." I crossed my arms and stared at the speakerphone. "What is your play, Gavin?" I asked coldly. "It is simple," he replied, his confidence bleeding through the speakers. "I just explained to your bosses that you have been under immense psychological stress. The infertility, the strain of your high-pressure job, it caused you to snap. I told them I do not want to see you fired. So here is the deal. You sign over the LLC that holds the deed to my penthouse. You release your legal claim on the clinic's operating accounts, and you sign a non-disparagement agreement. If you do that today, I will have Sydney take the video down. I will personally post a retraction stating that you are seeking professional psychiatric help and that this was all a massive misunderstanding. Your firm's reputation is saved and we can all move on. He was attempting to extort me. He was using my multi-billion-dollar firm as leverage to steal my real estate and my remaining trust fund. It was the most arrogant, legally suicidal move I had ever witnessed. Harrison looked at me, his expression grave. Natalie, we cannot afford to be dragged into a messy public domestic dispute. The optics are terrible. If he is willing to retract the statements, we strongly advise you to consider his terms. We need this fire put out immediately. I did not blink. I did not look panicked. I simply unlatched my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick, organized file I had compiled the night before. I slid it across the polished granite table directly into Harrison's hands. I am not signing anything, Harrison, I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Because the man on that phone is not a noble doctor trying to protect his pregnant girlfriend. He is a criminal who just attempted to extort a corporate executive across state lines. Harrison frowned, opening the file. What is this? That is the master financial ledger for his clinic, I explained, pacing slowly around the table. You will find irrefutable proof of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and the misappropriation of $620,000 of commercial funds. You will also see the title registration for a $140,000 luxury vehicle he purchased for his mistress using forged secondary guarantor signatures. My brother-in-law is a bank manager and I have all the receipts. The boardroom went dead silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper as Harrison and the other executives frantically flipped through the highlighted bank statements and wire transfer receipts. Gavin's voice crackled nervously through the speaker. Natalie, what are you doing? Shut up, you are embarrassing yourself. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from the conference phone. You thought you could use internet outrage to steal my company, Gavin. But you forgot what I do for a living. I follow the money, and you left a digital trail so wide a first-year law student could send you to federal prison. Harrison reached the final page. He looked at the forged bank authorizations, then looked up at me. The panic that had been gripping his face moments ago completely vanished. Harrison was a shark. He did not build a real estate empire by backing down from amateur extortionists. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He reached out and pressed the red button on the console hanging up on Gavin and plunging the room into silence. Harrison closed the folder, tapped his expensive pen against the granite table, and looked me dead in the eye. Destroy him, Harrison said. With Harrison's blessing securing my career, the panic that Gavin tried to instill in me completely evaporated. I walked out of that boardroom feeling absolutely untouchable. The firm was not going to fire me. In fact, Harrison immediately instructed our public relations and legal departments to prepare a massive defamation lawsuit against Gavin and his mistress. But corporate retaliation was simply not enough for me. Gavin had weaponized the internet by painting Sydney as an innocent victim and his mother as an oblivious bystander. I needed to systematically dismantle their entire manufactured narrative. I needed irrefutable proof of the timeline, and more importantly, I needed to prove that my mother-in-law was fully complicit in the betrayal while she was happily spending my money. I returned to my corner office, closed the heavy oak door, and locked it. I did not need to hire an expensive private investigator to track my husband. I am a commercial real estate portfolio manager in Chicago. My entire professional network consists of the people who own, operate, and secure the high-rises in this city. I pulled up the commercial lease agreement for Gavin's medical clinic. I recognized the name of the property management group immediately. I had done business with their regional director, a man named Richard, on 3 separate multi-million-dollar acquisitions. I picked up my cell phone and made a very quiet, very direct phone call. I told Richard I needed an immediate favor regarding the security infrastructure of his downtown medical building. Within 15 minutes, an encrypted email hit my inbox. It contained the master administrative login credentials for the clinic's underground parking garage security system. I opened a new browser window and logged into the cloud-based surveillance portal. The dashboard loaded, displaying dozens of high-definition camera feeds covering every inch of the luxury building. I bypassed the lobby cameras and went straight for the VIP underground parking levels. This was where the high-paying clients and the clinic staff parked their vehicles away from the public eye. I knew Gavin's routine, and thanks to the financial ledgers I had pulled the night before, I knew the exact date he had purchased the $140,000 Mercedes for Sydney. I set the date filter on the surveillance archive to the week of the vehicle purchase, which was roughly 2 months before our Thanksgiving dinner disaster. I started scrubbing through the timeline. The video player skipped forward in fast motion. Hours of empty concrete and luxury cars flew across my screen. And then, at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, I saw it. I hit the spacebar to pause the feed, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. There it was. The pristine white G-Wagon pulled into Gavin's reserved executive parking space. The camera angle was perfect, capturing the scene in flawless 4K resolution. I hit play at normal speed. The driver's side door opened and Sydney stepped out. She was not wearing her oversized pastel cardigan. She was wearing a tight designer dress clearly paid for by my trust fund, and her pregnancy was very visible. But she was not alone. The passenger door opened, and my mother-in-law Patricia stepped out into the brightly lit garage. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. Patricia, the woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table and insulted my working-class background. The woman who had told the police I was a crazy, estranged wife just 24 hours ago. I watched in crystal-clear, high definition as Patricia walked around the front of the luxury vehicle. She did not look distressed. She did not look like a woman mourning the collapse of her son's marriage. She looked absolutely thrilled. She walked right up to Sydney, threw her arms around the 24-year-old mistress, and pulled her into a massive celebratory hug. I watched the screen with cold detachment as Patricia reached into a high-end boutique shopping bag she was carrying. She pulled out a tiny, incredibly expensive baby onesie and held it up against Sydney's stomach, laughing joyously. The timestamp flashed brightly in the corner of the screen. 2 months ago, the entire family had known. Patricia had been shopping for baby clothes with my husband's pregnant mistress, driving around in a luxury car I unknowingly paid for, while simultaneously calling me every week to ask if I would cover the catering deposit for the clinic's upcoming launch party. They had orchestrated a complete family betrayal. I clicked the download button, saving the uncompressed video file directly to my secure hard drive. Gavin thought he could control the narrative with a fake, teary-eyed video. He had no idea I was currently holding the ultimate director's cut, and I was about to broadcast his mother's hypocrisy to the entire world. 2 days after I secured the parking garage footage, Gavin sent me a text message demanding we meet in person. He chose a crowded, upscale coffee shop right in the middle of the financial district. He wanted a public venue, assuming the presence of dozens of corporate professionals would force me to behave and keep my voice down. I agreed to the location. I dressed in my sharpest charcoal suit, grabbed my leather briefcase, and walked the 3 blocks from my office. When I arrived, Gavin was already sitting at a small corner table. He looked incredibly smug. He was sipping an espresso, dressed in a custom-tailored suit, exuding the false confidence of a man who thought he had completely outsmarted his wife. As I sat down across from him, he did not offer a greeting. He simply slid a thick, heavy manila envelope across the polished wooden table. "Go ahead and open it," Gavin said, leaning back and crossing his arms. I had my lawyer expedite the filing this morning. I picked up the envelope, unclasped the metal fastener, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. It was a formal petition for the dissolution of our marriage. But it was not just a standard divorce filing. It was a complete financial hostage situation. I kept my face entirely neutral as my eyes scanned the bolded demands his attorney had drafted. He was demanding a 50% split of my premarital trust fund, claiming that my initial investment in his business had legally commingled our separate assets. He was demanding permanent spousal support, arguing that my recent cancellation of the monthly operating transfers was a malicious attempt to bankrupt his medical practice and destroy his earning capacity. And there, buried on page 4, was the most delusional clause of all. He had included a specific legal stipulation explicitly defining my $620,000 investment as a non-refundable spousal gift, thereby absolving him of any repayment obligations. I looked up from the documents. Gavin was grinning, clearly mistaking my silence for shock. "My lawyer is a shark, Natalie," Gavin said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You tried to ruin my clinic, and Sydney's video proved to the world exactly what kind of vindictive person you are. The court of public opinion is already on my side. If we go to trial, the judge will see you as a wealthy, bitter corporate executive trying to destroy a pregnant woman and a dedicated doctor. They will give me everything I am asking for. So here is your only way out. Sign the papers today. Walk away from the clinic, give me half the trust fund, and I will not drag your name through the mud any further." I reached into my purse, pulled out my favorite silver pen, and flipped to the last page. I calmly signed the acknowledgement of receipt, confirming I had been officially served with the petition. I slid the divorce papers back across the table. Gavin smirked, reaching for the envelope. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable." "I am always reasonable, Gavin," I replied, keeping my voice soft but incredibly sharp. I opened my leather briefcase and reached inside. I pulled out a single, neatly folded document. I placed it on the table, keeping my hand flat against the paper. "But before we finalize the division of assets, I need to clear up a slight misunderstanding your lawyer seems to have regarding the nature of my investment." I slid the paper across the table. Gavin frowned, picking it up. His eyes scanned the header, and the smug smile slowly began to melt off his face. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly lacking its previous authority. "That is a UCC1 financing statement," I said smoothly, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. "Uniform Commercial Code Form 1. It is a legal form that a creditor files to give public notice that they have an interest in the personal property of a debtor." Gavin stared at the paper, his breathing growing shallow. "What does that mean?" "It means that my $620,000 was never a spousal gift," I explained, enunciating every single word so the reality would hit him like a freight train. "It was a secured commercial loan issued by my LLC to your medical practice. When Jamal processed the initial wire transfer, he also filed that UCC1 with the Secretary of State, establishing a first-position lien on your business. You signed the paperwork, Gavin. You just did not bother to read it because you were too busy picking out a luxury SUV for your mistress." The color completely drained from Gavin's face. He looked down at the document, his hands beginning to tremble as he read the fine print. "Your clinic does not own the state-of-the-art laser machines," I continued, my voice ice cold. "Your clinic does not own the imported marble reception desk, the leather waiting chairs, or the medical supplies. My company owns them. They are the collateral securing my loan. And since you failed to make your first official payment last week when I canceled the automatic transfer, your business is now in default." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. "You can ask for alimony all you want, Gavin. But by the time I am done executing this lien, your luxury medical spa will be nothing but an empty room. Enjoy your espresso. I will see you in court." I walked out of that coffee shop without looking back, leaving Gavin completely paralyzed in his seat. The crisp Chicago air felt entirely different now. It felt like absolute victory. I did not return to my corporate office. Instead, I hailed a cab and headed straight to the legal district. I took the private elevator to the 60th floor of one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the city. I was not there to hire a standard divorce attorney who would bicker over couch cushions and holiday schedules. I was there to see Veronica. Veronica was a senior partner, a ruthless litigator who specialized in high-stakes asset protection and commercial contract enforcement. She was the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour and was worth every single penny. I walked into her sprawling corner office. She was already sitting at her massive glass desk, reviewing the digital copies of the divorce petition Gavin had just served me. "Take a seat, Natalie," Veronica said, not looking up from her monitor. Her voice was sharp and entirely devoid of warmth, which was exactly why I hired her. "I just finished reading your husband's demands. Claiming your $620,000 commercial investment was a non-refundable spousal gift is the most legally illiterate strategy I have seen in a decade. His attorney must be fresh out of law school." I sat down in the leather chair opposite her. "He is desperate," I replied. "He thinks he can use public outrage and a viral video to scare me into signing away my assets. He has no idea what is actually buried in the corporate paperwork he signed." Veronica smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. She closed the divorce petition and pulled a thick black binder from the edge of her desk. She flipped it open to the center tab. "Let us review the trap you set," Veronica said, tracing her manicured finger down the first page of the contract. "When your brother-in-law processed the initial funding for the clinic, he presented Gavin with a standard commercial lending agreement drafted by your holding company. Gavin was so eager to get his hands on the cash to fund his luxury lifestyle and his pregnant mistress that he signed all 40 pages without reading a single clause. He always hated financial paperwork," I noted dryly. "He considered it beneath him. And that arrogance is going to cost him everything," Veronica stated. She tapped the paper firmly. "This is not a friendly business loan. This is a hard money loan. It is a specific type of asset-based financing designed for high-risk commercial ventures. You locked him into an 18% annual interest rate." I nodded. "A completely legal rate for a commercial entity in this state. He signed the guarantor forms willingly." "Exactly." Veronica continued, turning the page to the collateral schedule. "But the interest rate is just the appetizer. The real masterpiece is the security agreement. Gavin did not just pledge the business itself as collateral, he pledged every single physical asset inside that clinic." Veronica began reading from the itemized list I had painstakingly drafted months ago: 2 state-of-the-art dermatological laser machines valued at $150,000 each, the imported marble reception desk, 6 custom Italian leather waiting chairs, every computer, every medical supply cabinet, and every piece of office furniture. According to this contract, none of that belongs to Gavin. It is the sole property of your limited liability company until the debt is paid in full. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "I told him at the coffee shop that his business was in default," I said. "But I want to make sure the legal timeline is airtight before we strike." Veronica flipped to the final section of the contract, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Oh, it is airtight. And the timing is absolute perfection." She turned the binder around so I could read the bolded paragraph at the bottom of the page. "When you logged into your banking portal at the Thanksgiving table and canceled the $25,000 automatic monthly transfer, you did not just cut off his allowance," Veronica explained, her voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone. "That transfer was scheduled to cover his first official loan repayment to your holding company. By canceling it, you forced him to miss his very first installment." I looked at the bolded text. "The acceleration clause." "Precisely," Veronica said, leaning forward and folding her hands on the glass desk. "Because Gavin missed that initial payment, he triggered the default acceleration clause. He does not get a grace period. He does not get to set up a payment plan. As of midnight last night, the entire principal balance of $620,000 plus all accrued 18% interest and late penalties is due immediately." Veronica picked up her phone and dialed her paralegal. "Draft the writ of replevin," she ordered. "We are going to seize every piece of equipment he has." After leaving Veronica's office, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The legal machinery was now in motion, and there was absolutely nothing Gavin could do to stop it. I decided to take the rest of the afternoon off to decompress. I drove to the Oakwood Country Club, an exclusive members-only establishment where I held a corporate membership. I walked out to the sunlit terrace, took a seat at a quiet table overlooking the 18th hole, and ordered a sparkling water. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. But peace is a fragile thing when you are tied to a family of narcissists. I had barely taken my first sip when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up. Standing there wearing a pristine white tennis skirt and clutching a designer handbag like a weapon was my mother-in-law. Patricia's face was flushed with anger, her perfectly coiffed hair trembling slightly in the afternoon breeze. Several heads turned on the terrace. The elite members of the club were already sensing the drama. "I did not invite you to sit down, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice entirely even. Patricia slammed her hands flat against the wrought iron table, leaning in so close I could smell her heavy floral perfume. "I do not need an invitation from you, you ungrateful little witch," she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "I just got off the phone with Gavin. He is having a complete panic attack because your psychotic lawyer just sent him a notice of default." I took a slow sip of my water. Good. Then the courier made good time. "You are going to call your lawyer right now and drop this fake loan nonsense," Patricia demanded, her voice rising in volume. "You are trying to steal my son's business. You are trying to leave a pregnant woman destitute. I always knew you were trash. I always knew a girl from a blue-collar neighborhood could never understand how to behave with grace. You are a bitter, barren woman who cannot handle the fact that my son finally found a real woman to give him a family." The surrounding tables went completely silent. People were openly staring now. Patricia noticed the audience and stood a little taller, clearly emboldened by the attention. She thought she was shaming me. She thought she was putting the working-class girl back in her place in front of Chicago's elite. "If you do not call off your lawyers today," Patricia continued, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face, "I will personally make sure you are ruined in this city. I will have you blacklisted from this club. I will tell everyone what a monster you are. You will walk away with nothing, Natalie. Do you hear me? Nothing." I let her finish. I let the echo of her threat hang in the crisp air. I looked at the wealthy club members staring at us, and then I looked back at Patricia. Her chest was heaving. She looked so incredibly proud of herself. "Are you quite finished?" I asked softly. Patricia sneered. "Drop the lawsuit, Natalie, or I will destroy you." I sighed slowly, shaking my head. I reached down into my leather briefcase resting on the chair next to me. During my deep dive into Gavin's financial records, I had uncovered several interesting anomalies. Most of them related to my trust fund, but one specific file had nothing to do with me at all. It was a file I had printed and kept on hand, knowing this exact confrontation was inevitable. I pulled out a thick multi-page document stapled at the corner. I placed it gently on the table and slid it toward her. "I am not dropping the lawsuit, Patricia," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet terrace. "And you are not going to destroy anyone. You should be much more worried about your own survival." Patricia glanced down at the paper, scoffing. "What is this?" "More fake legal threats. That is a comprehensive commercial credit report," I explained, leaning back and crossing my legs. When Gavin realized my monthly transfers were not going to be enough to fund Sydney's luxury lifestyle and the clinic's inflated overhead, he went looking for more capital. He took out a $200,000 revolving line of credit with a high-yield medical supply lender. Patricia rolled her eyes. "So what? My son is a brilliant doctor. He has excellent credit." "No, Patricia, he does not," I corrected her. "His credit was destroyed 3 years ago, when I had to buy his foreclosed penthouse. The lender required a guarantor with pristine credit and substantial assets to secure that $200,000 loan." Patricia froze. Her eyes darted from my face down to the document. "Flip to page 3, I instructed coldly. Her trembling hands reached out. She flipped the pages. Her eyes scanned the highlighted section at the bottom of the guarantor agreement. "Gavin forged your signature, Patricia," I said, delivering the fatal blow. "He listed your home, your retirement accounts, and your personal assets as collateral. And because I froze his operating accounts and seized his business assets today, he has officially defaulted on that loan too. The creditors are not coming after Gavin because he has nothing left. They are coming after the guarantor. Patricia let out a choked gasp. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. "They are coming for you, Patricia," I whispered. "You are financially ruined, and your precious son is the one who pulled the trigger." I left Patricia trembling on the terrace of the country club, staring at the financial ruin her son had handed her. I did not stay to watch her cry. I had a strict legal timeline to follow, and the clock was ticking. I had given Gavin exactly 48 hours to respond to the formal notice of default, a standard commercial courtesy, before executing a lien. I knew he did not have the $620,000 to cure the breach, but I was curious to see how his arrogance would manifest when backed into a corner. I got my answer exactly 5 minutes after the deadline expired. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a new acquisition portfolio when an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender was Gavin. There was no formal letterhead from his attorney. There was no plea for a payment plan. It was just a direct, painfully patronizing message sent from his iPhone. I clicked open the email and read his words. "Natalie," he wrote, "I received the cute little legal threat your lawyer sent to the clinic. I actually had a good laugh with my staff about it. You really think you can just walk in here and take my medical equipment because of some technicality in the startup paperwork? Let me educate you on how the real world works. I am a licensed medical professional operating a secure healthcare facility. Patient privacy laws protect this building. Furthermore, I just upgraded the entire clinic with a top-tier biometric security system and hired private overnight security. You cannot repossess what you cannot access. Stop embarrassing yourself and sign the divorce papers." I read the email twice. I did not feel anger. I felt an overwhelming wave of satisfaction. Gavin thought a default notice was just a scare tactic. He thought corporate collection was like dealing with a standard credit card company that sends angry letters and makes annoying phone calls. He genuinely believed that a keypad lock and a rented security guard could supersede federal commercial law. Even better, his email provided written documentation that he was actively planning to obstruct a legal repossession, which was exactly the evidence I needed to bypass any standard waiting periods. I hit print. I took the freshly printed email, slid it into a manila folder alongside the UCC-1 financing statement and the default contract, and grabbed my coat. I bypassed my lawyer entirely for this step. I drove straight to the county courthouse. The atmosphere of the civil court building was a stark contrast to the pretentious luxury of Gavin's medical spa. There were no chandeliers here. There were no plush leather chairs or imported marble desks. There were just scuffed linoleum floors, harsh fluorescent lights, and the heavy, undeniable weight of the United States legal system. This was where fake empires were dismantled. I walked into the court clerk's office and pulled a specific petition from my briefcase. I had instructed Veronica to draft this document the moment Gavin missed his first payment, but I needed his active refusal to file it on an expedited basis. I stepped up to the thick bulletproof glass window and slid the stack of documents beneath the partition to the clerk. "I am filing an emergency petition for a writ of replevin," I stated clearly. "My commercial debtor has defaulted on a secured loan and has provided written confirmation of his intent to conceal and secure the collateral behind biometric locks. I am requesting an immediate ex parte order." The clerk, a woman who looked like she had seen every financial dispute in Chicago, adjusted her glasses and began scanning the paperwork. For those who do not operate in commercial finance, a writ of replevin is not a letter. It is not a request. It is a highly aggressive court-issued mandate that grants the plaintiff the right to physically seize disputed property before a trial even happens. More importantly, when a judge signs a writ of replevin, it authorizes the county sheriff's department to act as your personal collection agency. They are legally permitted to breach doors, bypass top-tier security systems and remove individuals who stand in the way of the repossession. The clerk reviewed the forged secondary guarantor forms, the original contract, and finally Gavin's arrogant email. She stamped the front page with a heavy red seal and clipped it to a blue backing folder. "The judge is in chambers reviewing emergency commercial injunctions right now," the clerk said, sliding a receipt back under the glass. "Given the written threat of obstruction, this will be pushed to the top of the stack." I thanked her and took a seat on the hard wooden bench outside the office. I only had to wait 45 minutes. When the clerk called my name, she handed me back a certified copy of the petition. Right at the bottom above a bold black line was the aggressive looping signature of a civil court judge. The writ was officially active. Gavin thought his biometric locks and his rented security guards made him untouchable. He thought his private medical spa was a fortress. He was about to learn that when you commit commercial fraud, the doors of your fortress do not keep the landlord out. They simply trap you inside with the sheriff. I left the county courthouse with the certified writ of Rep. Levine secured safely inside my leather briefcase. The heavy blue folder felt like a loaded weapon. I had the legal authority to dismantle my husband's fake empire piece by piece, and I had the county sheriff's department backing me up. I hailed a luxury town car and directed the driver back to my high-rise condo building. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting a brilliant orange glow over the Chicago skyline. I felt an incredible sense of momentum. I was practically untouchable. When the town car pulled up to the gleaming glass entrance of my building, the doorman tipped his hat and pulled the heavy door open for me. I stepped into the expansive marble lobby, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. I was heading straight for the private elevators when a frantic figure suddenly jumped up from one of the plush velvet waiting sofas. "Natalie, please wait." I stopped and turned around. Standing there looking completely unrecognizable from the smug, arrogant woman who had mocked my wardrobe at Thanksgiving dinner was my sister-in-law. Naomi looked absolutely terrible. Her designer trench coat was wrinkled, her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes, and her hands were trembling violently as she clutched her expensive purse. The concierge stepped out from behind his mahogany desk looking concerned. "Is everything all right, Miss Natalie?" he asked, keeping a suspicious eye on Naomi. "Do you need me to call security?" I raised a hand signaling for him to stand down. "It is fine, Henry," I replied smoothly. "She is just leaving." I took 2 steps toward Naomi, maintaining a rigid, icy posture. "You have an incredible amount of nerve showing your face in my building, Naomi," I said, keeping my voice low so the echoes would not carry across the lobby. "Your mother tried to barricade herself in my penthouse just yesterday. I am not in the mood for another family performance. Natalie, I am begging you," Naomi whispered, her voice cracking as tears welled up in her eyes. "I am not here for Gavin. I am not here for my mother. I am here for Jamal. You have to help us." I crossed my arms and stared at her. "What did you expect to happen, Naomi?" I asked coldly. "Your husband is a bank branch manager who actively facilitated massive commercial fraud. He bypassed federal regulations to help your brother steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from my trust fund. Did you really think my forensic accountants would just overlook that?" Naomi let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her trembling hand. "They locked him out of the branch this morning," she cried. "The corporate compliance office sent a team of internal auditors from New York. They found the forged secondary guarantor signatures on the medical supply line of credit, the one Gavin took out in my mother's name. Jamal is suspended pending a full federal investigation." She took a desperate step closer, looking completely broken. "If you testify against him, Natalie, or if you push the fraud charges to the banking commission, Jamal will go to federal prison. We will lose our house. Our kids will be ruined. We did not know how bad Gavin's lies were. I swear to you, we did not know." I looked at her tear-stained face and felt absolutely nothing. "You did not know," I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute disgust. You knew exactly what was happening when you drank champagne at the clinic launch party paid for by my stolen money. You knew exactly what was happening when you sat next to a pregnant 24-year-old mistress and smiled for the cameras. And you certainly knew what was happening when you mocked my clothes at Thanksgiving dinner, laughing while your brother financially bled me dry. Do not insult my intelligence by playing the victim now. Naomi shrunk back, her shoulders completely collapsing under the weight of her own hypocrisy. She knew I was right. She had enjoyed the perks of Gavin's deception, and now she was terrified of the bill. Please, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Tell me what you want. I will do anything. Just do not let Jamal go to prison. I stared at her for a long, silent moment. I did not care about Jamal's career, but Naomi had just handed me a massive tactical advantage. A mastermind knows when to use a pawn. I slowly uncrossed my arms. I can instruct my legal team to submit a formal affidavit stating that Gavin employed highly sophisticated deception tactics that intentionally bypassed standard banking protocols. I offered calmly. It will give Jamal a loophole of plausible deniability. He will probably be fired for negligence, but the Federal Commission will not pursue criminal collusion charges against him. He will avoid prison. Naomi gasped, her eyes widening with a sudden surge of desperate hope. Thank you, she cried. Oh my God, thank you, Natalie. I held up a single finger, stopping her celebration instantly. I did not say I was doing it for free, I corrected her. You are going to earn this affidavit right now. Naomi swallowed hard, nodding frantically. Anything. What do you need? Gavin is desperate to maintain his facade, I said, leaning in slightly. He is drowning in debt, his accounts are frozen, and he knows I'm coming for him. Men like your brother do not hide when they are terrified. They throw a party to convince their investors everything is fine. Tell me about the VIP success event he is planning at the clinic. Naomi froze. She looked completely torn between her loyalty to her toxic family and the survival of her own husband. But the choice was already made. It is this. Friday, Naomi whispered, her voice trembling as she betrayed her brother. 8 o'clock in the evening. He invited local influencers, his primary medical suppliers, and 3 major commercial investors he is trying to woo to bail him out. He rented champagne towers and a red carpet. I smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile. Hand me your phone and forward me the digital invitation, I demanded. Naomi fumbled with her purse, pulled out her phone, and forwarded the detailed itinerary directly to my email. I looked at the glowing screen, verifying the exact time and location. The trap was perfectly set. Gavin wanted an audience to witness his fake success. I was going to give them a front-row seat to his absolute destruction. Friday night arrived with a biting Chicago cold, but the atmosphere outside Gavin's downtown medical spa was radiating artificial heat. He had spared absolutely no expense for his grand illusion. A crimson-red carpet stretched from the glass entrance doors all the way to the curb, flanked by heavy velvet ropes and hired security guards wearing sleek black suits. Flashbulbs popped as local social media influencers and minor celebrities stepped out of their town cars, completely oblivious to the fact that they were walking into a financial crime scene. Inside the clinic, the expansive waiting area I had purchased had been transformed into a high-end nightclub. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see a towering pyramid of crystal champagne coupes stacked in the center of the imported marble floor. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated with trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. Sydney was standing near the custom reception desk, wearing a fitted designer gown that accentuated her pregnancy. She was playing the perfect glowing hostess, laughing and posing for selfies with the influencers who had defended her in that viral video. Patricia was there too, holding a glass of vintage champagne and laughing a little too loudly with a group of doctors. Despite the fact that I had handed her a credit report detailing her impending financial ruin just 2 days ago, she was desperately trying to maintain her wealthy socialite facade. She wore her expensive jewelry like armor, terrified that if she stopped smiling, the creditors would suddenly materialize through the walls. But the star of the show was Gavin. He was wearing a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo jacket, working the room with the practiced charm of a veteran politician. He was not just mingling for fun. He was specifically cornering the three major commercial investors Naomi had warned me about. I watched him gesture expansively toward the pristine treatment rooms and the state-of-the-art laser machines. He was pitching them. He was using the sheer spectacle of this massive party to convince them his business was a goldmine, desperately hoping to secure their capital tonight so he could replace my frozen trust fund before the first of the month. At exactly 8:30, the ambient house music faded out. Gavin stepped up onto a small raised platform near the reception desk. He tapped a silver spoon against his champagne glass, calling for the room's attention. The chatter died down, and dozens of smartphones were immediately raised into the air, their recording lights glowing red. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Gavin began, his voice projecting smoothly through a wireless microphone. "When I first envisioned this clinic, I wanted to create a sanctuary, a place where beauty meets cutting-edge medical science, but building an empire is never easy." He paused dramatically, placing a hand over his heart. He looked down at Sydney, offering her a tender, sorrowful smile. "Recently, my family and my business have faced some incredibly dark challenges." Gavin continued, his tone dripping with practiced vulnerability. "We have learned the hard way that not everyone wants to see you succeed. Sometimes to achieve your true potential, you have to make the painful decision to cut toxic, unsupportive, and deeply unstable people out of your life. You have to protect your peace, and you have to protect your family." The crowd let out a collective murmur of sympathy. A few of the influencers actually snapped their fingers in agreement. Gavin raised his champagne glass high into the air. "To new beginnings," Gavin announced proudly. "To cutting out the dead weight, and to the unstoppable future of this clinic." The room erupted into applause. Glasses clinked. Sydney wiped a fake tear from her eye. Gavin looked out over his crowd of admirers, his chest puffed out with absolute triumph. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed his biometric locks, his rented security, and his viral internet narrative had made him a king. Meanwhile, I was sitting in the back of an unmarked black SUV parked directly across the dark street. I watched the flashing lights of the party through the heavily tinted windows. I listened to the muffled sound of the applause bleeding through the glass doors. I checked the silver watch on my wrist. It was exactly 8:45. Right on schedule, a pair of heavy headlights turned the corner onto the dark asphalt. I looked through the windshield as three massive, heavy-duty commercial moving trucks rumbled down the street. Their air brakes hissed loudly in the cold night air as they pulled into the loading zone, parking in a solid line directly in front of Gavin's pristine red carpet. A second later, two black and white county sheriff cruisers slid silently into place behind the trucks, their light bars dark, waiting for my signal. The illusion was over. It was time to collect. The heavy door of my unmarked SUV opened, letting in a sharp gust of the freezing Chicago wind before slamming shut. The lead sheriff's deputy settled into the passenger seat, his utility belt creaking against the leather. He was a broad-shouldered man with a completely stoic expression, holding a flashlight in one hand and his radio in the other. Through the heavily tinted windshield, we both watched the chaotic flashing lights of the red carpet just 50 feet away. The bass from the clinic's sound system vibrated through the floorboards of the vehicle. "Are your men in position?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the glass doors of the medical spa. The deputy nodded, turning on the small overhead dome light to read the paperwork. "I have 4 armed officers securing the perimeter and a dozen bonded movers waiting in the cabs of those 3 trucks." He looked over the blue-backed legal folder containing the writ of replevin that I had handed him earlier. "The judge's signature is clear. We are authorized to enter the premises, bypass any security measures, and physically seize every piece of medical equipment, furniture, and electronic hardware listed on this schedule. Since the doors are wide open for a public event, we do not even need to force entry. We can just walk right in." "He will not go quietly," I warned him, keeping my voice completely flat. "He is currently pitching 3 major commercial investors. When you walk through those doors and announce that his business is in default, he is going to panic. But he is a narcissist, and narcissists are incredibly resilient when they have an audience. The deputy raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I turned to look at him, the faint glow of the dome light reflecting off the windshield. I mean that seizing his laser machines and his waiting room chairs will humiliate him, but it will not destroy him. He will try to spin the narrative. He will stand in front of those wealthy investors and tell them this is just a minor clerical error caused by a bitter soon-to-be ex-wife. He will assure them that he still holds a 10-year commercial lease on one of the most coveted pieces of real estate in downtown Chicago. He will beg them for capital, promising he can just order new equipment tomorrow and be operational by next week. The deputy frowned. If he has a 10-year lease on the property, he might actually be able to pull that off. We are only here for the equipment. We cannot stop him from occupying the building. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. That is where you are wrong. I unlatched my leather briefcase for the second time tonight. I reached past the folders containing the wire fraud evidence and the forged banking documents. I pulled out a thick, heavy stack of paper bound in a premium black leather spine. I placed it on the center console between us. What is that? The deputy asked, shining his small, tactical flashlight onto the cover page. That is the master commercial lease agreement for the property we are parked in front of, I explained. When Gavin was scouting locations for his dream clinic, he specifically wanted a building owned by a massive, faceless conglomerate. He thought renting from a giant corporation would mean zero personal oversight, allowing him to run his fraudulent accounting without any annoying landlords asking questions. He signed this lease with a holding company called Horizon Commercial Properties. I flipped the thick document to the very last page, where Gavin's signature was scrawled across the dotted line in blue ink. What he did not know, because he was too arrogant to read the addendums, is that Horizon Commercial Properties is a direct subsidiary of the real estate firm where I work, I said smoothly. In fact, it is the exact portfolio I manage. The deputy looked at the document, his eyes widening in realization. He traced his finger down to the managing agent's signature line right beneath Gavin's name. There, written in crisp black ink, was my name. He thinks his landlord is an anonymous corporation in a high-rise building, I whispered, my voice thick with absolute authority. He has no idea that his wife is the authorized asset manager for this property. I own the ground he is standing on. I flipped to a separate single-page document tucked into the back of the binder. Commercial leases contain very strict moral turpitude and illegal activity clauses. I continued. When my forensic accountants confirmed he committed wire fraud and forged his mother's signature to secure credit lines on this premises, he violated the terms of his lease. So I am not just here to repossess his toys. I tapped the single sheet of paper. It was a formal, legally binding notice of immediate eviction. I am here to take his playground, I said. Give the order, deputy. It is time to crash the party. The deputy next to me raised his two-way radio to his mouth and gave a sharp, definitive command. Move in. I stepped out of the unmarked SUV and into the freezing Chicago wind, my leather briefcase gripped tightly in my hand. Behind me, the heavy doors of the sheriff cruisers swung open. 4 armed deputies stepped onto the pavement, their tactical boots hitting the asphalt in perfect unison. A second later, the doors of the commercial trucks rattled open, and a dozen broad-shouldered men in matching gray jumpsuits piled out. They carried heavy-duty steel dollies, thick moving blankets, and industrial toolkits. We marched directly toward the crimson-red carpet in a tight, intimidating formation. The hired security guards stationed at the velvet ropes took one look at the approaching officers, saw the silver badges gleaming under the streetlights, and wisely stepped completely out of the way. I reached the heavy glass doors of the medical spa and pushed them open. The blast of warm climate-controlled air and thumping house music hit me instantly. We stepped into the lavishly decorated lobby. I stood in the center, wearing my sharp charcoal corporate suit, flanked by a wall of uniformed law enforcement, with a literal army of movers standing at attention behind us. The visual contrast between our tactical entry and their champagne-fueled celebration was absolutely jarring. The DJ stationed near the imported marble reception desk saw the police officers and immediately killed the music. The sudden silence in the massive room was deafening. The only sound was the sharp shattering of glass as my mother-in-law Patricia dropped her vintage champagne flute onto the marble floor. Dozens of heads turned toward the entrance. Sydney, standing near the towering champagne pyramid, froze entirely. Her hands instinctively clamped down over her oversized pastel dress, her eyes wide with sheer panic. Gavin was still standing on his raised platform. His arm was still suspended in the air from his victorious toast. His eyes locked onto mine, and the arrogant, triumphant smile melted off his face in less than a second. For a brief moment, he looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights. Then his raging narcissism kicked back in. He slammed his glass down onto a nearby cocktail table and stormed off the platform, his face flushing violently with anger. "What the hell are you doing?" Gavin roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of the clinic. His velvet tuxedo jacket flapped as he marched aggressively across the room toward me. "You psychotic witch! I told you to stay away from my business. You cannot just bring fake rented security guards in here to ruin my private event." He lunged forward, raising his hand to point a finger directly in my face. He never made it. Two of the sheriff's deputies instantly stepped in front of me, forming a solid barricade of blue uniform and Kevlar. The lead deputy held up a massive gloved hand, stopping my husband dead in his tracks. "Take one more step toward her, sir," the deputy warned, his voice deep, commanding, and entirely devoid of amusement. "And you will spend the rest of your night in county lockup. Back away right now." Gavin stumbled backward, his eyes darting from the shiny silver badges to the heavy-duty firearms strapped to their hips. The realization hit him like a physical blow. These were not rented security guards. This was the actual county sheriff's department. His jaw dropped open. "What is this?" Gavin stammered, looking around frantically at his wealthy guests. "Officers, this woman is my estranged wife. She is having a mental breakdown because I am moving on with my life. This is a private, secure medical facility. She is trespassing. Arrest her right now." I looked past Gavin's panicking face and quickly scanned the room. The three major commercial investors he had been desperately pitching were standing near the hallway, their expressions shifting from mild confusion to deep, absolute disgust. Investors despise liability, and nothing screams financial liability louder than a police raid. But the local influencers were a completely different story. The young social media stars who had blindly supported Sydney's fake viral video realized that the drama of the century was unfolding right in front of them. Phones were instantly whipped out of designer purses. Glowing screens illuminated the dim room as dozens of cameras were pointed directly at us. I could hear the faint, rapid clicking of recording buttons. They were not just taking pictures. They were live streaming the entire confrontation to hundreds of thousands of followers in real time. I stepped out from behind the deputies, fully aware that every single camera lens in the room was focused squarely on me. I smoothed the front of my suit jacket and looked Gavin dead in the eye. "I am not trespassing, Gavin," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent, breathless room. I unlatched my briefcase and pulled out the heavy blue folder containing the writ of replevin. I handed it directly to the lead deputy. "I am simply here to collect my property." The lead deputy took the heavy blue folder from my outstretched hand. He did not even glance at Gavin's panicked, flushed face. He simply opened the folder, verified the judge's signature one final time, and turned to face the crowded room. He reached to his shoulder and clicked the volume dial on his lapel microphone, ensuring his voice would carry over the whispers of the stunned guests. "By order of the County Civil Court," the deputy announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, "this establishment is subject to an immediate writ of replevin. We are executing a court-ordered seizure of physical assets to satisfy a $620,000 commercial lien currently in default. Anyone who interferes with this legal process will be arrested immediately." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The glowing screens of the influencers' smartphones suddenly pushed closer, capturing every single humiliating second. The three major commercial investors, the men Gavin had just spent the last hour begging for capital, completely froze. They looked at the armed deputies, then looked at Gavin, their expressions hardening into masks of absolute disgust. Gavin stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Aline!" he finally stammered, his voice cracking loudly. "What lien? This is a mistake. You cannot do this. I am a doctor. You cannot just take my equipment." The lead deputy ignored him entirely. He turned to the dozen men in gray jumpsuits waiting by the entrance. "Commence the seizure," he ordered. "Follow the asset schedule." The movers moved with the ruthless efficiency of a military strike team. They bypassed the stunned guests and marched directly into the heart of the clinic. The heavy rubber wheels of their steel dollies rumbled aggressively against the imported marble floors. Sydney finally snapped out of her frozen state. As two massive movers headed toward the hallway leading to the private treatment rooms, she threw herself directly into their path. She spread her arms wide, her oversized designer dress catching the cold draft from the open front doors. "You cannot go back there!" Sydney screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "This is a sterile medical environment. You are ruining everything. Gavin, do something!" The movers did not even break their stride. One of the deputies stepped forward gently but firmly, grabbing Sydney by the arm and pulling her out of the way. "Ma'am, step aside," the deputy warned. The movers pushed past her into the primary treatment suite. I followed them, watching with cold satisfaction as they approached the crown jewels of Gavin's fake empire. The two state-of-the-art dermatological laser machines. Each one was worth $150,000 paid for, entirely by my trust fund. Gavin ran into the room behind me, his velvet tuxedo jacket now looking absurdly out of place. He lunged forward, trying to throw his body over one of the massive white machines. "You cannot take these," he pleaded, his voice completely devoid of its former arrogance. "I have patients scheduled for Monday. I need these to operate." The deputy stepped up right behind Gavin and rested his hand casually on his heavy-duty taser. "Sir, I will say this one last time," the deputy growled. "Step away from the collateral or I will put you in handcuffs for felony obstruction." Gavin looked at the weapon, then looked at me. His eyes were wide with a pathetic, desperate terror. He slowly raised his hands and backed away, completely emasculated in front of his mistress and his guests. The movers reached down and yanked the heavy black power cords from the wall outlets. The low, constant hum of the medical equipment died instantly. The silence that followed was the sound of a business flatlining. They threw thick, padded moving blankets over the pristine white machines, strapped them tightly to the heavy-duty dollies, and began wheeling them out of the room. Sydney was sobbing uncontrollably now, her hands covering her face as she watched the $150,000 machines roll right past her. Back in the main lobby, the dismantling was escalating. Movers were actively unbolting the custom Italian leather chairs from the waiting area. Another team had surrounded the massive marble reception desk, drilling out the brackets to separate it into movable pieces. The DJ was frantically unhooking his laptop and soundboard before the movers could take the table right out from under him. Gavin stumbled back into the lobby, his breathing shallow and rapid. He saw the three commercial investors putting on their expensive wool coats, preparing to leave. He rushed over to them, holding out his hands in a desperate plea. "Gentlemen, please wait," Gavin begged, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is just a temporary misunderstanding. My ex-wife is just trying to cause a scene. We still have the 10-year commercial lease. The business is completely viable. I can order new machines tomorrow." The lead investor, a sharp-featured man with zero tolerance for liability, looked Gavin up and down with sheer contempt. "You have a $600,000 default, and the sheriff is currently rolling your entire practice out the front door," the investor said coldly. "We are done here. Do not ever contact my firm again." Gavin stood frozen as his last financial lifeline walked out the door, and disappeared into the Chicago night. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind the departing investors, sealing the clinic in an atmosphere of absolute dread. The thumping house music was gone, replaced by the chaotic symphony of a business being physically dismantled. Movers were aggressively wrapping the custom leather chairs in heavy blue blankets and strapping them to steel dollies. The massive marble reception desk, once the centerpiece of Gavin's luxury brand, was now reduced to fractured slabs being hauled out to the waiting trucks. Patricia watched the investors walk away, and the fragile, wealthy socialite facade she had been desperately clinging to finally shattered. She knew exactly what the departure of that capital meant. With the clinic stripped of its assets, Gavin had absolutely no way to generate revenue. And without revenue, there was no way to pay back the $200,000 medical supply loan he had fraudulently secured in her name. The financial ruin I had promised her at the country club was no longer a threat. It was a reality unfolding right in front of her eyes. Something inside my mother-in-law completely snapped. She dropped her designer handbag onto the floor, her face twisting into a mask of pure unhinged rage. She let out a guttural scream and lunged directly at me. Her manicured hands curled into claws. "You ruined us!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking as she charged across the marble floor. "You vindictive barren monster! I will kill you!" She did not even make it within 5 feet of me. The deputy standing to my left moved with lightning speed. He stepped forward, caught Patricia by the shoulders, and effortlessly spun her around. He pinned her arms behind her back, pressing her firmly against the glass wall of the nearest treatment room. "Ma'am, calm down right now, or you are leaving this building in handcuffs," the deputy barked, pulling a pair of heavy steel cuffs from his belt for emphasis. Patricia began to sob hysterically, her face pressed against the glass as she thrashed against the deputy's grip. "My credit!" she wailed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "You took everything. My son is a doctor. You cannot do this to us." Gavin was hyperventilating. He looked at his mother pinned against the wall, then at Sydney, who was curled up on a stripped couch, weeping uncontrollably. And finally, his eyes darted to the crowd of local influencers who were still standing in the lobby. Their smartphones were still raised. The recording lights were still glowing red. The live stream was capturing every single pathetic second of his family's collapse. Gavin knew his reputation was bleeding out on the internet, and his raging narcissism demanded a tourniquet. He straightened his posture forcefully, adjusting the lapels of his velvet tuxedo jacket. He needed to spin this. He needed to prove to his digital audience that he was still the victim, and more importantly, that he was still in control. "Listen to me, everyone," Gavin shouted, his voice echoing over the sound of the movers dragging equipment away. He stepped into the center of the room, raising his hands in a gesture of absolute defiance. "Let her take the machines. Let her take the chairs. They are just objects. My wife is throwing a temper tantrum because she cannot handle the fact that I am building a family without her. But she cannot take my business." He pointed a finger at the ceiling, looking wildly around the room at the cameras. "This clinic is not about the furniture," Gavin declared, his voice rising in a desperate crescendo. "It is about the brand. It is about the prime location. I hold an ironclad 10-year commercial lease on this building. I am the legal tenant of this premium downtown real estate. I will call my suppliers tonight. I will buy new laser machines tomorrow. We will restock the inventory, we will refurnish the lobby, and we will be open for business on Monday morning. She can strip the paint off the walls, but she cannot legally kick me out of my own practice." A few of the influencers actually lowered their phones, murmuring among themselves. Gavin's desperate pitch was working on the naive crowd. He was successfully painting the picture of a resilient entrepreneur surviving a bitter domestic attack. He looked over at me, a sickening, triumphant smirk returning to his face. He genuinely believed his geography saved him. He believed that as long as he had the keys to the front door, the empire could be rebuilt. I waited for the murmurs to die down. I let him bask in his false victory for exactly 5 seconds. Then I stepped forward. "You are right about one thing, Gavin. I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. You did sign an ironclad 10-year commercial lease for this premium downtown real estate. You signed it with a conglomerate called Horizon Commercial Properties. Gavin sneered, crossing his arms. That is right. And their corporate attorneys are not going to care about our marital disputes. I pay my rent on time. My lease is untouchable. I smiled. It was the same cold, calculated smile I had given him at the Thanksgiving table right before I financially decapitated him. Horizon Commercial Properties is not just a faceless conglomerate, Gavin, I explained, pacing slowly toward him. It is a direct subsidiary of the commercial real estate firm where I work. It is the exact portfolio that I manage. You were so blinded by your own arrogance, so eager to sign the paperwork and get the keys that you never even bothered to look at the name of the managing agent at the bottom of the lease agreement. Gavin's smug expression faltered. His arms slowly uncrossed. What are you talking about? I unlatched my leather briefcase for the final time tonight. I reached inside and pulled out a single heavily stamped legal document. I held it up for him and for all the cameras to see. I am your landlord, Gavin, I said softly. I own the ground you are standing on. The color completely drained from his face. His jaw went slack. A terrifying silence fell over the room as his brain desperately tried to process the magnitude of his mistake. And as your landlord, I am obligated to enforce the moral turpitude and illegal activity clauses embedded in every standard commercial lease in Chicago, I continued, my voice growing louder, echoing off the bare walls of the stripped clinic. When my forensic accountants proved that you committed federal wire fraud, and when you forged your mother's signature to secure credit lines on this very premises, you placed my property at severe legal risk. You are in material breach of contract. I handed the document to the lead deputy, who immediately stepped forward and shoved the paper directly into Gavin's trembling chest. Gavin reflexively grabbed it, his eyes scanning the bold red letters at the top of the page. Due to commercial fraud and the illegal diversion of funds on these premises, I announced, ensuring every single person on the live stream heard my next words perfectly. Your 10-year lease is terminated, effective immediately. You no longer have a business. You no longer have a location. Everyone in this room has exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property before you are all arrested for trespassing. The moment the words "arrested for trespassing" left my mouth, the remaining loyalty in the room completely vanished. The local influencers, who just moments ago were drinking Gavin's champagne and defending his honor on their live streams, suddenly realized they were standing in the middle of a massive legal catastrophe. Nobody wanted their pristine personal brand associated with federal wire fraud and a commercial property eviction. A frantic, chaotic rush for the exit immediately began. Women in expensive designer gowns and men in tailored suits grabbed their wool coats from the rack and practically sprinted for the heavy glass doors. They pushed past each other, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and my husband as legally possible. Even the hired catering staff dropped their silver trays onto the cocktail tables, stripped off their white aprons, and bolted for the rear service elevator. Within 3 minutes, the lavish, high-profile launch party was completely abandoned. The only things left behind were discarded crystal flutes, spilled wine, and a shattered illusion of success. Gavin stood utterly alone in the center of the emptying room, his chest heaving violently. He was hyperventilating, pulling in short, ragged gasps of air that sounded like a drowning man. His eyes darted wildly from the eviction notice trembling in his hand to the armed deputies surrounding him. The custom velvet tuxedo jacket he wore, which had looked so regal just 20 minutes ago, now looked like a tragic costume on a terrified child. He tried to take a step toward me, holding his hands out in a pathetic, desperate begging gesture, but his knees buckled slightly under his own weight. He was experiencing a full-blown panic attack. The absolute certainty of his own genius had completely evaporated in an instant, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of his financial and legal reality. He had no clinic, he had no medical equipment, he had no commercial lease. He had absolutely nothing left to his name. But the ultimate, sharpest betrayal did not come from me or the police. It came from the very woman he had stolen my money to impress. Sydney stepped out from behind the dismantled reception desk, her face twisted in a vicious mixture of horror and fury. She did not rush over to comfort the man who was currently gasping for air. She marched right up to him, grabbed the lapels of his expensive jacket, and shoved him hard in the chest. "What is she talking about, Gavin?" Sydney screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. "Are you actually broke? Did you use her money to buy my car? Tell me the truth right now. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me you owned this entire building and that she was just a bitter ex holding you back. You promised me a luxury lifestyle, Gavin. Are we bankrupt? If she takes the business, how are you going to pay for my life?" Gavin could not even form a coherent sentence to defend himself. He just shook his head, staring blankly at the marble floor, as tears of pure, unadulterated humiliation began to stream down his face. The lead deputy checked his heavy tactical watch and stepped between them. "Your 10 minutes are officially up," he announced coldly, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "Everyone out of the building, right now." The deputies moved in swiftly, physically grabbing Gavin and Sydney by the arms and marching them forcefully toward the exit. Another deputy unpinned a sobbing Patricia from the glass wall and pushed her aggressively along with them. They were practically shoved out the front doors and deposited onto the freezing concrete of the Chicago sidewalk. I followed them to the entrance but stopped just short of the threshold, remaining inside the warm, brightly lit lobby. I stood firmly on my own property, looking through the heavy glass doors at the family that had tried to destroy me. They were shivering in the biting cold wind, completely stripped of their power, their stolen money, and their dignity. A mover stepped up beside me holding a heavy-duty power drill and a brand-new solid brass deadbolt. He knelt down at the glass door, the loud, aggressive whir of his drill echoing through the empty clinic. Gavin pressed his trembling hands against the cold glass from the outside, his breath fogging the pain, watching in absolute despair as the locks were literally changed right in front of his face, locking him out of his fake empire forever. The sharp mechanical whine of the power drill finally stopped. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked loudly into place, echoing through the thick glass. Gavin's hands slid down the pane, leaving brief, foggy streaks of condensation before the freezing Chicago wind wiped them away. He stepped back, stumbling slightly over the uneven concrete. The 3 commercial moving trucks roared to life, their heavy diesel engines drowning out the faint sounds of downtown traffic. They pulled away from the curb one by one, carrying $620,000 worth of medical equipment and my entire investment right out of his life. Patricia stood a few feet away on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest. She was not wearing a coat, only her expensive silk blouse and heavy diamond necklace shivering violently under the harsh glow of the streetlights. She watched the taillights of the trucks disappear down the avenue. Then she turned her head and looked at her son. For her entire life she had viewed Gavin as an infallible genius. He was the golden child, the successful surgeon who validated her own sense of superiority. But looking at him now, a hyperventilating bankrupt fraud shivering in a velvet tuxedo, the illusion completely shattered. The brutal mathematics of the situation finally caught up with her. I had handed her that commercial credit report at the country club, warning her about the $200,000 medical supply line of credit Gavin had taken out using her forged signature. She had been in severe denial, desperately banking on the fact that Gavin's clinic would generate enough revenue to quietly cover the massive debt. But the clinic was gone. The doors were locked. The revenue stream was entirely dead. She marched over to him, her designer heels clicking sharply against the freezing pavement. "Gavin," she snapped, her voice trembling with a toxic mixture of cold and rising panic. "Gavin, look at me." He slowly turned his head. His eyes were completely hollow. "Mom, I do not know what to do," he whispered, sounding like a terrified child. She did not offer him a comforting embrace. She did not tell him that they would figure it out together as a family. Instead, she grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo jacket and yanked him forward. The loan, she hissed, her eyes wide and manic. The medical supply loan. The $200,000 you fraudulently put in my name. How are you going to pay it? The bank is going to come after my house. They are going to drain my retirement accounts. How are you going to fix this? Gavin swallowed hard, looking desperately around the empty sidewalk, as if a bag of cash might suddenly fall from the sky. I do not know. He stammered, his voice cracking. My accounts are frozen. Natalie took everything. I need a lawyer, Mom. Maybe you can take out a second mortgage to help me retain counsel. We can sue her. We can get the business back. That was the absolute breaking point. He was not apologizing. He was not taking responsibility for forging her signature and ruining the rest of her life. He was asking her to sacrifice even more of her personal assets to save him from his own criminal incompetence. Patricia's face contorted into a mask of visceral, unfiltered hatred. She let go of his jacket, raised her right hand high into the air, and slapped him across the face with every single ounce of strength she possessed. The sharp, violent crack of her palm against his cheek echoed loudly over the idling engine of the remaining sheriff cruiser. Gavin stumbled backward, completely stunned, clutching his rapidly reddening face. You parasitic monster! Patricia screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet street. You stole from me. You forged my signature. You threw my entire life away to play pretend in a rented building with a pregnant child. I have nothing left because of you. I'm going to be living on the street. The two deputies who had escorted them outside immediately stepped forward, placing their hands firmly on their utility belts. Ma'am, step back from him right now, the lead deputy ordered, positioning his broad shoulders between the mother and son. Keep your hands to yourself, or you are going in the back of that cruiser for assault. Patricia ignored the officer's threat, backing away from Gavin as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. She pointed a trembling finger at him, tears of absolute rage streaming down her face. Her conditional love had completely evaporated the exact second his bank account hit zero. Do not ever call me again, she sobbed, her wealthy facade utterly annihilated. You are no son of mine. You are a criminal. You belong in prison. I watched the entire brutal exchange from the quiet, warm interior of the clinic lobby. I stood behind the locked glass doors, feeling absolutely no sympathy for either of them. They had spent decades feeding off each other's toxicity, enabling their mutual arrogance, and treating everyone else like disposable pawns. Now the money was gone, and the parasites were finally turning on each other. Patricia turned on her heel and marched down the freezing Chicago sidewalk, her designer coat flapping aggressively in the biting wind. She did not look back. Gavin remained completely frozen for a moment, clutching his stinging cheek, where the bright red handprint was already beginning to swell against his pale skin. He looked like a pathetic broken shell of the arrogant doctor who had stood on a raised platform, toasting his own brilliance just an hour ago. He slowly turned his head toward the only person he had left in the world. Sydney was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly over her oversized pastel maternity dress. She was staring at her smartphone, her thumb swiping rapidly across the glowing screen. She did not look like a terrified, heartbroken partner mourning the loss of a business. She looked intensely annoyed. Gavin stumbled toward her, reaching out with trembling hands. Sydney. He whispered, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. Sydney, please. My mother is just panicking. We will figure this out together. I can declare bankruptcy and wipe the debt clean. I can get a job at another medical practice. We still have each other. We still have our family. We have the baby. He reached for her shoulder, desperately seeking the warm, supportive touch she had offered him all night in front of the cameras. Sydney stepped back so quickly that Gavin almost lost his balance on the concrete. Do not touch me, she snapped. Her voice was completely unrecognizable. The soft, sweet, victimized tone she had used in that viral internet video was entirely gone. It was replaced by a harsh, grating sneer that echoed loudly on the empty street. She locked her phone and slipped it into her expensive designer purse, looking Gavin up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Gavin froze, his hands hovering uselessly in the cold air. What are you saying? He asked, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. We have to stick together. We are having a child. Sydney let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through the freezing wind. Are you literally out of your mind, Gavin? She asked, shaking her head, as if he were the dumbest person she had ever met. Do you honestly think I am going to stay with a bankrupt fraud who just got evicted by his own wife on a live stream? You told me you were a multimillionaire. You told me you owned this entire building. You told me your crazy ex-wife was just a minor inconvenience who would eventually be forced to pay you permanent alimony. She gestured wildly toward the empty street where the moving trucks had disappeared. You have absolutely nothing, Gavin. You are a joke. You do not even own the luxury car I drove here tonight. Your wife owns it. She owns everything. And you want me to stick around and help you figure it out. I am 24 years old. I am not spending the best years of my life living in a cheap apartment and paying off your mother's forged credit card debt. Gavin looked as though he had been physically stabbed in the chest. But our baby, he pleaded, thick tears welling up in his eyes and spilling down his cheeks. I am the father of your child. You cannot just leave me. We need to think about the baby's future. Sydney stared at him for a long, silent moment. A cold, calculating smile slowly spread across her face. She reached up and casually unbuttoned the top of her oversized pastel cardigan. There is no baby, Gavin, she said smoothly. Gavin stopped breathing entirely. What? He whispered. I am not pregnant. Sydney clarified, her voice dripping with absolute malice. I never was. Do you really think I would risk ruining my body for a man who needed his wife to pay his rent? I needed financial security. You were a wealthy, arrogant doctor who was desperately looking for an excuse to leave his marriage and feel like a savior. So I gave you exactly what you wanted. But the ultrasound, Gavin stammered, his entire reality crumbling beneath his feet. I saw the ultrasound. We announced it to my family. We bought baby clothes. Sydney rolled her eyes. You can buy a fake sonogram online for $40, Gavin. I bought it the exact same day you gave me the keys to the Mercedes. I needed to lock you down before the clinic officially opened to make sure I secured the bag and got my cut of the profits. But now that the bag is entirely empty, I have absolutely no reason to keep wearing these ridiculous padded dresses. She patted her stomach, flattening the bulky fabric to reveal that the prominent bump was nothing more than clever foam padding and posture. Gavin fell back against the brick wall of the building, sliding down until he hit the cold pavement. He pulled his knees to his chest, burying his face in his hands, and began to sob hysterically. He had thrown away a brilliant, wealthy, loyal wife for a con artist who had played him with terrifying precision. A sleek black Uber pulled up to the curb, its hazard lights flashing in the dark. Sydney opened the back door of the vehicle. She paused for a single second, looking down at the broken man crying on the freezing concrete. Have a nice life, Gavin, she said coldly. Try not to freeze to death. She climbed into the warm car, slammed the heavy door shut, and the Uber sped off down the street, leaving my husband completely and utterly alone in the dark. I stood behind the locked glass doors of my property, watching the red taillights fade into the distance. The street was finally quiet. The game was entirely over. 3 months later, the freezing winds of that November night had given way to the slush and gray skies of late Chicago winter. But inside the heavy oak doors of the United States Family Court building, the temperature felt downright absolute zero. I sat perfectly straight in a high-back leather chair wearing a tailored navy suit. To my right sat Veronica, my cutthroat attorney, organizing her meticulously tabbed legal binders. Across the wide mahogany aisle sat my soon-to-be ex-husband. Gavin looked absolutely terrible. The custom velvet tuxedo jackets and arrogant smirk were completely gone. He was wearing an off-the-rack suit that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight, his skin looked sallow, and his hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the defense table. The past 90 days had been brutal for him. Without his clinic, without his mother's financial backing, and without his fake pregnant mistress, he had been reduced to working as a junior contractor at a low-end strip mall dermatology clinic just to make rent on a tiny apartment. At exactly 10 in the morning, Judge Caldwell entered the courtroom. She was a stern, no-nonsense woman who had zero patience for domestic drama, disguised as corporate litigation. She banged her gavel, sat down, and immediately opened our massive file. Your Honor, Gavin's attorney began standing up and buttoning his jacket. We are here to finalize the dissolution of this marriage. My client concedes to the equitable distribution of the shared assets. However, regarding the $620,000 commercial debt my client owes to the plaintiff's holding company, we have formally filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in federal court. My client is entirely insolvent. We ask that this court acknowledge the pending bankruptcy stay and discharge this debt, allowing him to move forward with a clean slate. Gavin stood up next to his lawyer. He looked up at the judge, clasping his hands together, desperately trying to deploy his old charm. Your Honor, I lost my business. I lost my family. My wife executed a hostile takeover of my medical spa. I have absolutely nothing left. I am just asking for a chance to rebuild my life without this crushing financial weight around my neck. I did not flinch. I did not object. I simply looked at Veronica, who offered a slow, predatory smile. She stood up, smoothing the front of her blazer. Your Honor. Veronica said, her voice ringing out with crystal-clear authority. The plaintiff has no objection to the defendant filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. In fact, we encourage it. Gavin looked over at us, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Even his lawyer looked surprised. However, Veronica continued, sliding a heavily stamped document across the clerk's desk. We ask the court to formally recognize that the commercial debt in question does not qualify for a standard discharge under the United States Bankruptcy Code. Judge Caldwell picked up the document, adjusted her reading glasses, and scanned the pages. What exactly am I looking at, counselor? You are looking at the forensic accounting report alongside the police affidavit regarding the forged secondary guarantor signatures on the defendant's commercial leases, Veronica explained. The defendant did not just fail at running a medical practice. He actively committed federal wire fraud. He forged his mother's signature. He illegally diverted corporate funds to purchase a luxury vehicle for his mistress. Veronica turned and looked directly at Gavin. According to Section 523 of the United States Bankruptcy Code, any debt obtained by false pretenses, false representation, or actual fraud is explicitly non-dischargeable. The courtroom fell completely silent. Gavin's lawyer rapidly flipped through his own codebook, his face draining of color as he realized Veronica was absolutely correct. He leaned over and whispered something into Gavin's ear. Gavin physically recoiled, shaking his head. No, Gavin gasped, looking up at the judge. No, that cannot be right. I am bankrupt. You cannot make me pay that. Judge Caldwell took off her glasses and stared down at him with an expression of pure judicial contempt. The law is incredibly clear on this matter, sir, she stated firmly. You cannot use the bankruptcy courts to wash your hands of criminal fraud. The $620,000 debt plus the 18% annual interest penalty you agreed to in your contract survives your bankruptcy filing. It is non-dischargeable. Gavin let out a choked, panicked sound. I do not have the money. I will never have that kind of money again. Then you will pay it back slowly. Judge Caldwell replied coldly. As a licensed medical professional, you have future earning capacity. I am granting the plaintiff a permanent wage garnishment order. A percentage of every paycheck you earn for the rest of your natural life will be automatically diverted to the plaintiff's holding company until the principal and interest are paid in full. She picked up her gavel. Furthermore, given the gross financial misconduct demonstrated by the defendant, I am granting the petition for divorce in favor of the plaintiff effective immediately. The defendant is entirely responsible for his own legal fees. We are adjourned. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a resounding crack that echoed like a gunshot. The marriage was officially over. Gavin collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands, fully realizing that he was now my financial prisoner forever. I stood up, gathered my leather briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The crisp air of the courthouse hallway felt entirely different than it had 3 months ago. It felt like absolute undeniable freedom. I had not just survived his betrayal, I had systematically dismantled his future legally and publicly, ensuring he would spend the next 3 decades paying me back for the privilege of trying to destroy me. He wanted to be a rich doctor with a trophy wife and a luxury clinic. Now he was a disgraced employee with a garnished paycheck and a ruined reputation. Exactly 1 year after that heavy wooden gavel fell and legally severed my ties to a family of parasites, I stepped off the private elevator and onto the top floor of my downtown Chicago commercial building. The harsh, biting winter had long since surrendered to a bright, vibrant spring. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that was once a monument to a narcissist, but was now a testament to absolute resilience. The sterile white walls and the cold, pretentious aesthetic of Gavin's luxury medical spa were completely gone. The fractured marble reception desk that my movers had dismantled on the night of the eviction had been replaced by a warm, sweeping counter made of reclaimed natural wood. The waiting area where his local influencers had once recorded his humiliating downfall was now a tranquil, sunlit sanctuary filled with lush greenery and comfortable seating. I walked slowly across the hardwood floor, listening to the soft ambient music playing through the overhead speakers. I had not just evicted my ex-husband, I had completely reimagined the real estate. I took the $620,000 worth of repossessed medical equipment, liquidated the state-of-the-art laser machines to a private hospital network at a premium, and used the capital to fund my own vision. The space was now a highly profitable comprehensive women's health and wellness center. Where Gavin once ran a vanity-driven plastic surgery clinic designed to feed his ego, I had built a collaborative facility featuring top-tier gynecologists, physical therapists, nutritional counselors, and mental health professionals. We offered holistic, empowering care for women. Within its first 8 months of operation, the Wellness Center had secured a massive corporate partnership, generating triple the monthly revenue Gavin had ever projected for his fake empire. I paused by the front desk to greet my new clinic manager. She was a brilliant, experienced professional in her late 40s, a sharp contrast to the 24-year-old mistress Gavin had hired to play house. My manager handed me the quarterly financial summary, smiling warmly as she pointed to our record-breaking profit margins. I thanked her and took the folder, feeling a profound sense of pride that had absolutely nothing to do with a trust fund. As I opened the folder, my private cell phone buzzed in my suit pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an automated notification from my banking app. A direct deposit had just cleared into my holding company's account. I smiled, feeling that familiar icy satisfaction wash over me. It was Gavin's monthly wage garnishment. Every single month on the 15th and the 30th, a legally mandated percentage of his paycheck was automatically ripped from his bank account and deposited into mine. I knew exactly where the money was coming from. Gavin was working 60-hour weeks at a discount walk and dermatology chain out in the distant suburbs. He spent his days treating rashes and sunburns under flickering fluorescent lights, taking orders from a clinic director 10 years younger than him. He would be making those painful forced deposits to me for the next 30 years. The rest of his family had fared no better. Patricia lost her sprawling brick colonial home. The medical supply creditors seized her assets to cover the loan her golden boy had fraudulently secured in her name. She was currently living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, utterly abandoned by the wealthy social circle she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Naomi and Jamal were barely scraping by. True to my word, I had provided the affidavit that kept Jamal out of federal prison, but he was permanently terminated from the bank and stripped of his financial licenses. He was now working as a mid-level sales representative, while Naomi had to take a job in retail just to help cover their mortgage. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I walked down the wide, sunlit hallway of my wellness center, passing by treatment rooms where women were actually being healed, not manipulated. I stopped right in the center of the main studio, standing on the exact spot where Gavin had once pointed a finger at me and demanded I be arrested for trespassing. I took a deep breath of the clean, calm air. I thought about that Thanksgiving dinner a year and a half ago. I thought about the laughter, the insults, and the sheer audacity of a family that believed my only value was the size of my bank account. They pushed me out into the cold, expecting me to quietly freeze so they could enjoy the warmth of my money. They thought they could use me to build their empire. So I took the bricks back and built a fortress. Never let anyone tell you that you only belong at the family table if you're paying for the meal. Thank you for watching my story. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic table and build your own fortress, leave a comment below and let me know how you took your power back. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of surviving, thriving, and demanding what you are worth. Stay strong and always read the fine print. The most profound lesson hidden within the wreckage of this betrayal is that financial independence and legal literacy are the ultimate shields against emotional manipulation. Society often conditions women to believe that true love requires blind trust, encouraging us to merge our assets and ignore the fine print in the name of marital devotion. But this story proves that blind trust is a luxury no one can truly afford. When someone attempts to weaponize your love to build their own empire, it is not your tears or your outrage that will protect you. It is the contracts you signed, the receipts you kept, and the boundaries you firmly established. Gavin and his family operated under the toxic assumption that emotional abuse and public shaming would force compliance, completely underestimating the absolute power of a woman who understands her legal rights and controls her own capital. This is a stark reminder that you must never fund someone else's dream at the expense of your own security. Whether you are dealing with a romantic partner, a family member, or a business associate, you must protect your peace and your portfolio with equal ferocity. Always read the fine print, secure your investments with ironclad legal frameworks, and absolutely refuse to shrink yourself to fit into rooms where your intrinsic worth is constantly questioned. True empowerment comes from knowing that if the table you are sitting at suddenly turns hostile, you have the resources and the leverage to buy the entire building and evict the disrespect. If you are ready to stop apologizing for your success and start building your own unbreakable financial fortress, share this story with a woman who needs to be reminded of her absolute power today.